Hi, everybody. Dr. Kahn here from RSU22. And today I wanted to do a question and answer session. I'm recording this in a little different way, using the Zoom session to share some screens with you folks and go over some slides. I got a really strong response with questions from teachers and support folks. So I want to spend some time going over a handful of those questions today. I'm guessing there are going to be 2 or 3 videos with question and answer because there was just far too much to do in a single video. So bear with me here. I'm going to share a screen and go over some of the questions with you guys. All right, we're going to start with slide number 1 here. I really appreciate everybody giving me their feedback and being a part of this process. So one of the first questions is, what are the signs that I should watch for if I've been given too much? Giving too much, it should be saying. Copied it and pasted it here. Essentially, we're really looking at folks understanding how much they're investing and how much time and energy they're expending in their daily lives. When do you draw the line? How do you manage and understand maybe if you're at your limit? Well, the first thing we want to keep in mind is that so much of what we're going through is energy dependent. So if you are spending tremendous amounts of energy in the day to day, you're going to see you're starting to feel fatigued. You'll see your motivation trail away, have less energy for things in the day to day. You're going to find that you're often snapping at folks, whether it be coworkers, your kids on Zooms, or your own kids in your own household or your family members. One of the things that's really difficult is that we are trying to fit our entire work life into random and odd episodes of time. So if we have Zoom sessions or remote sessions that occur outside of our normal hours, or we're responding to emails at time of day where we wouldn't normally be in school, people are going to be giving up a heck of a lot more of their time and energy than they're accustomed to. One of the things that's really a big risk for folks are some of the behavioral choices they make. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we were having lots of sort of Zoom get-togethers for coffee or cocktails or a variety of things. And as we're approaching the 9-month mark here, people have to realize that at some point, even though I don't like the idea of the concept of a new normal, we do have to focus on taking care of ourselves, taking away the idea of self-care by way of having too many drinks or having too much junk food or bringing in too much takeout. These self-soothing activities are really going to have a negative impact over the long term. Making sure that you're carving out time for your family and your activities of interest. If you don't have the energy for them, or you're finding that you're cutting out all of your day-to-day time to do work activities, or you're too fatigued to even do things you enjoy, this is a sign that you've given too much and that you are giving up too much of yourself to your work. Obviously, if you look at the clock and you realize, my gosh, where is my day gone? I don't know what day of the week it is. I'm doing work in the nighttime. I'm doing work on the weekends. Setting boundaries and barriers for yourself is extremely important. One important piece of this for folks is acknowledging and understanding when these things are getting difficult for you. Understand, how is this working? And if you're starting to feel severely depressed, down, angry, upset, and your emotions are not under good control, and you feel that your reactions aren't responding to your normal strategies, it may be a really important time for you to reach out and speak to somebody, get some clinical support, get information from your coordinators about what's going on in terms of your EAP. Do you have access immediately? Obviously, knowing the people who are your allies in your day-to-day are going to be really important to get support. But if you get to the point where you are not able to get up, get moving, you're starting to have really discouraged thoughts on a regular basis, and your motivation is falling very hard, it's time to seek some support and help. Tremendous numbers of people are needing help, and getting online support, doing therapy online, doing Zoom sessions to support yourself is incredibly important. One of the really important questions I was asked was talking about how do we understand it and navigate the perspectives and expectations we have for ourselves and our kids. And I think this is really important. Understanding that so many of you were trained to work in a standard, typical classroom. Your interactions online are not typical. You're not engaged with one another in a way that you had all of your training and expertise in. So right out of the gates, to expect that you're going to have the same level of skill and outcome as before is completely unrealistic. Understand the idea and reality test with one another about why should I feel that my skills are going to be as strong in one modality versus another if you've never been trained and you've never been given the technology to do it properly. It's so difficult because people hold themselves to such a high standard. But those expectations can often be unrealistic. That's not to say that you're not going to carve out professional development time, work on learning some new technologies. But people have often made the analogy that you're trying to build a plane while you're actually flying in it. And I think that's a pretty apt metaphor for what we're doing in schools today. When we think about looking at why we would have expectations today that make sense, and refer to things like Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow was a psychologist who spoke about understanding that the most important human needs are the things we need to address first. I've listed here that we're going to look at the next slide. We're actually not going to look at Maslow's hierarchy, so I'll talk through it here a little bit verbally. Maslow's hierarchy takes into account that our safety needs, our needs for belonging, our needs for connection with others, our needs that supersede our ability to do more complex tasks, things like academic achievement, work achievements, making money, doing things that require sort of a different level of attention. Obviously, during the time of a pandemic, people are worried about health. Many people are out of work or have had less work hours. They have their lives changing dramatically with their kids being in their homes a heck of a lot more than trying to navigate work from home, children at home doing remote learning on several days of the week. So it's impractical to think that we're going to be able to expect ourselves to achieve and succeed at the levels we would um, during times that were normal, let alone during times of COVID. Think about your students, think about yourselves, and understand you've got to reformat your expectations to take into account things like financial, health, safety, and other stressors, not just for yourself and for your peers, but also for the families you're coping with and working with. Very important to keep that in mind for having accurate expectations. When we think about what's next in our lives, what are the things that we're dealing with? Um, Continuing on with ideas like, how much stuff is going on in my life that's important that should require my attention? When you were thinking about staying up for the extra hours to do work, trying to put yourself in a situation where you're scoring a few more papers or doing another professional development video, it's not realistic to think that you should be doing that for yourself. The important stuff going on in your life needs its appropriate attention, and the clock and calendar have been shattered lately. For some of your kids who might be struggling significantly, it would be really meaningful at times to check in with them or their families, find out how things are going with them. It's really easy to assume for some kids who weren't achieving before the closures and before the move to hybrid learning that perhaps we're seeing evidence of laziness or low effort levels. For some of our kids, there could be evidence of some depression. They could be finding that things in their life are far too hard for them to cope with. And having some insight into that may help you alter your expectations of what they're going to be able to do in the day to day. Wherever possible and in whatever time limited fashion you can, offering kids additional opportunities to show that they're competent, that they understand and know what they're being asked to do. In some cases, that may be reaching out to parents and saying, can you talk to your kids for 15 minutes about this topic we're discussing in class today? Can you just report back to me whether or not they're having success? Obviously, I'm not asking folks to add more and more work to themselves, but I do think we have to be flexible in how we seek knowledge about how our kids are doing, because right now they may really struggle to initiate tasks on their own. Kids with ADHD, kids with organizational challenges, kids who aren't terribly good at being self-starters are going to need that external support. And a lot of that's going to fall to their parents during hybrid or remote learning days. So this is a really good question that was shared with me, and it's something that I'm trying to cope with on a regular basis. How do we cope with the guilt of balancing work from home and our kids' needs on remote days when our work has to come first? And again, I could probably reference back to Maslow's hierarchy here a little bit. If we don't provide for our families, do our jobs, and stay employed, it's going to be very difficult for us to provide what our families need and to keep that roof over our heads. One of the things I say to folks when they start experiencing really significant guilt is the idea that you have to forgive yourselves. You have to give yourself permission to be imperfect and to know that you can't be at your best in all environments at all times, especially during this time of pandemic. We have to think about the important things first. And if that issue comes to be with a family, make sure that as you as an employer and perhaps as a parent of children, reach out and share that information with your teachers. If you are a teacher, reach out to families and to find out, hey, how are you guys doing? Are there any things I can do to take some of the pressure off you? Um, what can we do to modify things to realistically give your children access to their learning without making things too overwhelming? It's really important also, if you're working from home, to have conversations with your kids about your expectations if you're doing work meetings, how to interrupt you and when an interruption is important. I remember my own parents saying, if you're not bleeding from the head or the house isn't on fire, I need to do this meeting. Very important as you look at your children's schedules for remote learning days and for distance learning, or hybrid days, is to make sure that you review your schedules. Is there flexibility you might have with your employer that might allow you to schedule your meetings at times where your kids aren't in class? If that's not possible, setting expectations and realistic parameters for your own kids so they know what's happening. If you find they're not engaging in their work, conversations with their teachers about are there schedule changes they might make, things that we can do to support the teachers in getting the kids engaged in their own learning. This question was raised to me, and it's a tough one. How do I forgive the people who are not wearing masks and resisting other ways to limit the spread of COVID-19? So, you know, this one's hard because I don't know that, we all necessarily believe or think that we have to forgive anyone for their behavior. I think during a time like now, we have to focus on keeping ourselves and our families safe. If you are concerned about this, you take your own precautions. You wear your mask, you physically distance. If you see someone without a mask on, it's important to continue to keep your distance. The best way to prevent transmission is to mask and to distance. If someone else isn't masked, you double your distance. You establish that. You are not the law enforcement. You are not the leader of all things. Do not go over to them and engage in a discussion or an argument about mask wearing. All you're doing in that moment is increasing the probability that you're going to have exposure to someone else's germs. And I think that that's something that I would personally avoid and encourage you to do so. Forgiveness is really a choice that we all make, whether it's a choice of your faith, a choice of your personal beliefs and morals. And it's something that I struggle to reconcile. I struggle because I think that we should all be looking to be in alliance with one another, to be well and to take care of each other and to take care of each other's grandparents or family members by just doing the good, healthy rituals. If it's something you don't believe or you don't agree with, reconsider if you can. Can you help other people? Are you uncomfortable? I think we're all uncomfortable. And I hope we can all sort of join together. But forgiveness is sort of a lofty goal. So, what are some of the strategies we can use regarding anxiety about COVID-19 exposure? And I would add to this, another person asked a question about how do we help families in terms of reacting to and coping with the periodic quarantines, the exposure notifications we get from school, things of that nature. You know, I know we hear in the news a lot of the time that our schools are typically considered some of our safest places to be, primarily because people within the school buildings are compelled to do more safety behavior than we see in any other parts of our communities. Everyone in our schools are being masked and they are establishing more physical distance. We're engaging with more use of ventilation systems and fans. So generally speaking, most of the safety requirements needed are being honored in schools, and they are being monitored very, very carefully. The spread of COVID is dramatically decreased in circumstances like this, and there's a lot of good data to support that. If you get notification or read emails about exposures, exposure doesn't mean infection. Exposure merely means that we're taking the extra steps to perhaps quarantine and keep those who may have been exposed away from spreading the exposure further. We are seeing very low transmission rates between people historically. And obviously in the last couple of weeks, things have been fairly intense. But again, the idea of within our school systems is that we are sanitizing, we're cleaning, and we're making more internal efforts to limit those exposures. If you are anxious about exposure and concerns with COVID-19, take the extra steps in your household, within your family, and limit your contacts outside of your immediate household. Use curbside services to get your groceries. Order things online where possible. Limit those coincidental and incidental exposures. Understanding that for families who are highly anxious about COVID and are finding that their kids are struggling to engage when in school, a discussion about their choice. They can choose to engage in remote learning, do what allows them to stay safe and feel more comfortable. Again, we can hearken back to Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't feel safe, the ability to learn and do higher activities cognitively is going to be limited. So for some of our kids who might be struggling with anxiety as a general rule, COVID's really going to magnify that. And I always find, as a child of someone who was a little bit anxious, or a little bit overly protective, I in turn tend to be overly protective. So apples don't fall far from trees. And I respect families' abilities and desires to protect. And sometimes that anxiety is something I don't want to talk them out of. I want to give them opportunity and choice so they don't feel forced into doing things they're uncomfortable with. Obviously, the present data around infection impact survival rates. Those are all pieces of data that people can find reassuring if they read them with an objective eye. Anxiety sort of takes away objectivity. So just be aware, there are a lot of reasons for us to be able to navigate that anxiety. So what do we think in terms of connecting with kids via virtual and remote learning? For so many of our teachers who are meeting freshmen for the first time, doing academic advisory across grade levels, what we're finding is it's awfully hard to get to know and engage with our kids who we don't have access to. And the reality is, online activities are going to be a poor substitute for many of us. The goal of providing information and providing instruction is sort of a transaction. I'm giving you my face on a screen, you're giving me information on a screen, and our relationships are actually going to be typically fairly weak. And it's a compromise that none of us like. But I think you have to give yourself some permission to understand that that's a disadvantage. For some of the teachers I've worked with, utilizing, especially at the start of new semesters or quarters, getting to know you exercises, getting kids to tell you about their private interests. What do they do for fun? Make me a little video of one of your talents or something that you've done that you're proud of. And for teachers, showing a little bit of your personal side too, showing kids your humor, your interests, the things that you find fun or funny or interesting. And that'll help bridge some of those gaps. But the reality is this isn't ideal and we don't love it. We like to be with our kids in our space and getting to know them really personally. And right now that's just not a possibility. Okay, that's it for the video right now. So folks, I'll be heading back to you and doing a variety of videos in the coming weeks. Probably later this week or early next, I'll do a little more QA sessions and a support video shortly before Christmas. Hope you guys are doing well, and it was wonderful seeing you here today.